in the region of the Sarawak region along the Scrang River are the longhouses of these Iban hunters. They still do hunting with blowpipe, but until recently they were headhunters, and spending some nights in their lodges is a somewhat discomforting experience where the chandeliers are made up of the skulls of their ancestors. And in fact, some of the residents in the longhouses actually sleep with those skulls as pillows. I guess it's a comforting thing to have some of that spiritual energy.
Peter Guttman is a photographer, writer, and adventurer who has traveled on assignment through all 7 continents, covering more than 250 countries. Author of 8 books, he is the recipient of the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Exploration and Storytelling, has won 3 times the Lowell Thomas Travel Journalist of the Year Award, and has been cited as one of the 20 top most influential photographers. If you're as passionate about adventure and adventure stories as we are, you can support our work by simply buying us a cup of coffee. The link is in the show notes below. Now, back to our interview. Peter Guttman, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Whiskey and a Map. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. It's so great to be here.
Now, I've got a lot of questions, and I'm sure looking behind you with all those artifacts, you have a lot of stories to tell. But one of the first things we do here as an icebreaker, sort of a tradition, is do you have a good drinking story for us?
Well, having just returned actually from Canada, I was up in Assiniboine, which I think is one of the most spectacular landscapes on the planet. But it does bring to mind a particular moment in the Yukon, one of the 3 territories of Canada, spending a little bit of time in Dawson City, in downtown hotels, sourdough bar, where I was honored to be able to engage in a drink called the sourdough cocktail. And you might not guess from the name, but it actually does involve an amputated large toe that is used as a garnish in a drink of Yukon Jack, a whiskey with, I think, some honey in it or whatever. And it was a tradition that started back in the 1970s based on an incident that occurred in the 1920s when a prospector and a rum runner, 2 brothers, got into a blizzard, and one of them had a toe that got infected, and it seemed as if the gangrene was spreading, and the other brother used an axe to chop off the toe to stop the spread of the gangrene. And they popped it into a glass of alcohol to preserve it. So fast forward about 5 decades later, and this resident of Dawson City was scavenging through a remote cabin, and he found that glass with the toe and decided it would be a great idea to bring it back to Dawson City. And they started a tradition called the sourdough cocktail, whose only rule is you could drink it fast, you can drink it slow, but your lips must touch that gnarly toe. And I did drink it, and you get a certificate for drinking it, and it was one of the more interesting imbibement moments I've had in my life.
How did it taste?
It didn't taste like chicken, as they say. It was pretty interesting, but they've gone through several toes actually. A few times it got lost. One time it was swallowed. The person had to pay an immense fine for that, and it's still a tradition that's going strong today.
Wow. Now you started out on a very different path than the one you're on now. You were actually a pre-med student, but how'd you go from pre-med to geographer, photographer, adventurer?
So I guess I did always have a fascination in geography. I do remember when I was maybe 5 years old, spreading out a map on my living room floor, and I decided right then and there that the two places I most wanted to go to in my life were Spitsbergen and Chad. And how I picked those places, I think, because Spitsbergen seemed closest to where Santa Claus lived, on the map, because it was all water above that. And Chad seemed to be the heart of the mysterious continent of Africa. And so I always was very interested in maps. And when I was maybe 8 or 9, did a book called People Around the World, which was done with magic marker. And I was interested in how people live. But then I got more serious, and I was kind of a nerdy, I guess a nerdy kid when I was younger. And I started doing research, much like that TV series Doogie Howser that some of your older listeners might be familiar with, but I was somewhat of a child prodigy. And I started doing artificial heart research when I was 10 and 11 years old. And so by the time I was 12, I was written up in a medical magazine. It was writing about my research I was doing in helping develop an internal power source that could drive an artificial heart. I was invited to the laboratories of Willem Kalf out in the Cleveland Clinic. He was the gentleman that invented the artificial kidney and was a real pioneer working on the artificial heart. And he offered me an opportunity to work with him in his lab. And he was the doctor, by the way, that eventually hired as an assistant Robert Jarvik, who was famous for the Jarvik heart. And so I figured it would be best if I finished my studies first at college. And sometime in my sophomore year, as I looked around at all the people in pre-med, it occurred to me that I wanted to have a much more expansive life, being somewhat familiar with how amazing this planet was, even though I hadn't traveled extensively. I had done a lot of book reading, and I decided that I could not narrow a path in life and sculpt it in such a specific manner to feel satisfied when I was looking back at the end of my life as to how I led this one mortality span. So I got a degree in geography, and that was sort of like an interdisciplinary science that combined so many different levels: climatology and meteorology, archaeology and anthropology, and so I basically pursued that. And on the day that I graduated from college, just a few hours before the graduation ceremony, I jumped out of a single-engine airplane a few miles away from the graduation site, and when I met my parents at the graduation ceremony, I told them it's the most exciting day of my life. And I think they thought I was like some summa cum laude honoree or something. But when I told them about it was all due to the fact that I jumped out of an airplane, I thought I could detect just a hint of disappointment on their face. But nonetheless, it really made me think about how much adventure I wanted to pack into my forthcoming life.
Well, one of those roads took you to Southeast Asia. That's a place that I'm particularly interested in, trips to Borneo and Cambodia, Vietnam myself, and I know you've traveled there extensively. Can you tell us about your travels in Borneo and New Guinea and the people that you met there, especially the headhunters in Borneo? Tell us about those folks.
I've always been fascinated with Borneo. It is the only island in the world that is three different nations: Brunei, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And in the region of the Sarawak region along the Skrang River are the longhouses of these Iban hunters. They still do hunting with blowpipe, but until recently they were headhunters, and spending some nights in their lodges is a somewhat discomforting experience where the chandeliers are made up of the skulls of their ancestors. And in fact, some of the residents in the longhouses actually sleep with those skulls as pillows. I guess it's a comforting thing to have some of that spiritual energy kind of transferred during the nighttime to the living occupants of that longhouse. And in the morning, you wake up and you'll see they're blowpiping for their breakfast or catching monkeys in that way. And you arrive there by dugout canoe. But even perhaps more amazing are the Asmat people on New Guinea, which is the second largest island in the world. New Guinea is divided between Papua New Guinea on one side, the independent nation, and Papua, as it's now called, which was called Irian Jaya, which is inhabited by the Asmat. The island's so fascinating because it really hosts almost 500 different languages, people that have been segregated into these little corrugated mountain ridges that kind of separate one culture from another that never met one another, and they develop their own language or whatever. But along the coast, the mosquito-ridden coast where malaria has in the past run rampant, the Asmat people were noted for their carvings. And in fact, those carvings now featured in a wing in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that's called the Michael Rockefeller Wing, was named after Michael Rockefeller, the son of the then-time governor of New York. And he was out there collecting those carvings when his boat capsized. And while the exact story of what happened to him has never been accurately discovered, it is said that he swam ashore and eventually was a dinner participant with the Asmats, but not as a guest, but rather as a main course. They were living a cannibalistic life. And the carvings that they carved were done to give spiritual permission for them to go out on headhunting raids. And I was on an expedition along with members of the American Museum of Natural History, and in a dugout canoe that capsized, and I wound up giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to one of the passengers who everyone had been accounted for but one, and that one came up underneath the open-ended hull of the dugout canoe, and we got him to shore. I gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which seemed to be working for a moment, and then he did eventually pass away, and he had to be stored in the potato locker of the ship. But that expedition to see one of the Asmat's really unique rituals deeper in the rainforest was canceled as a result. And it was a very sad experience. I did wind up with some of their carvings before I left, and some of those I think can be seen in the background on the wall, actually.
What were they like as you were mingling among them and talking to them, the Asmat?
Well, you have to understand that we're not sharing a common language, so a lot of it is based on body language, and there are local people that help to kind of crudely interpret their thoughts or whatever. They are very, very suspicious people, which was one reason why we had to make such a quick retreat after that death, because they believed that we were bringing evil spirits with us. So we couldn't tarry there much longer at that point. But beforehand, they seemed to have a very gentle, if somewhat suspicious, nature about them. And they live in these small huts that are connected by wooden boardwalks, because it's so swampy that there's no way you can really get around that region without walking above the muddy, the muck of these rainforests or whatever. But a very unique people living living very, very primitive lives, essentially eating taro, which is a kind of yam for their nutritional requirements. And they have a flotilla of these dugout canoes that have war symbols on the prow, sort of like figureheads for these raids that they go out on. Some of the Asmat live in these atop these swaying trees and these almost treehouse type structures that are further away from the coast, closer to the interior of Irian Jaya.
Now, are they still, those folks that are still raiding each other's villages?
Well, they have a lot of tension and hostility between neighboring clans. Oftentimes, these are solved with the bartering or the donation of pigs, which is almost like a form of currency. And while the government itself has tried in many ways to interfere with the more deadly aspects of cannibalism, they still do conduct a lot of they engage in a lot of hostile and tense interactions with neighboring tribes. Let's put it that way.
Did you ever learn why they take heads and why they engage in cannibalism?
Well, it has to do with the power that can be acquired from being in possession of your enemy's head, your enemy's body, their spirit, and it is almost like a zero-sum game there, in that you're acquiring the energy and spirits of other people, so you're adding it onto your own.
Now compare that to Borneo and those headhunters. Were they keeping the heads of in Borneo? Were they keeping the heads of their relatives so that they keep their family members, or were these?
Yes, I would say that is a slightly less hostile perspective they had on that activity.
Yeah, and can you describe the landscape in these areas?
Sure. Well, in Borneo, it tends to be more mountainous and hilly, with the Skrang River and other navigable rivers being the way neighboring villages are stitched together. In Irian Jaya, I've certainly not covered the whole region, but along the coast, it is, as I mentioned, remarkably swampy and mosquito-ridden, with almost bayou-like in certain ways. And the waters are quite shallow, which was one of the reasons why that dugout canoe basically capsized. It was because their motor cut out, and without an ability to steer the direction of the dugout canoe, they were able to drift in such a way that water came at them at a perpendicular direction and swamped the boat, which flipped over. And it was in these very shallow bays where the water, the height of the waves are multiplied by the shallow depth of the water. So it's another reason why that area wasn't really settled by European colonizers, is you couldn't get large vessels in there closer to shore because of how shallow the bays were for many, many miles off of the coast.
I was in Borneo racing in the Eco Challenge many, many years ago. And I recall we did this, it was at nighttime. We're on the mountain bike section. And we were coming into this place they called the Lost World. And I remember it vividly because it's middle of the night, midnight plus, super humid. And we come over this hill and we're descending into this valley. And we get into 100% humidity. It is just 100 degrees out, 100% humidity as you're just going down into this jungle. And it was the most remarkable place I've ever seen.
Scenes like that, they linger in your head for a lifetime. And I mean, I might be mistaken on this, but I'm under the impression that the phrase "lost world" originally came from Arthur Conan Doyle's depiction of the tapuis that are found in South America. And these are like in the area near Guyana and Venezuela. And that is also a very, very mysterious region, out of which Angel Falls actually cascades, which is the tallest waterfall in the world at near 3,000 feet high.
Well, speaking of that place, you met some very interesting people. Is it the Vanuatu?
In Vanuatu?
Yeah, Vanuatu. And then, yeah, tell us about those folks.
In Vanuatu, this is a region where, especially on the island of Ambrin, they perform a sort of black magic that helps sustain their lifestyles, and they put on performances in the village, not for tourists, but actually more to educate the young children about some of the spirits that lurk in the forests there. And on the neighboring island of Pentecost Island, it's a neighboring island to Ambrin, they have these very unique ceremonies. The Naghol divers, the land divers, that will build 100-foot high rickety bamboo towers from which they will jump with vines attached to their ankles, and they will try to have their hair touch the ground without breaking their neck, and this helps to ensure a successful yam harvest. And it's a pretty wild spectacle to see. And I understand that there was only one death that ever occurred, and it occurred when Queen Elizabeth came, because Vanuatu at the time was a subject of the British crown, and she came to see one of the amazing spectacles of the country of Vanuatu. And it was not the right season for the land diving, but I think some British representative insisted on the spectacle being put on. So what that meant were the vines did not at that point have the right degree of elasticity that was required, and consequently, one of the divers died, and perhaps right in front of the Queen herself. But it's really quite a remarkable spectacle to witness. I feel very privileged to have seen that.
Remarkable. But then you have to wonder, how'd that ever start? That jumping off, basically bungee jumping, your hair just has to touch the ground, transferred into this ritual so that the harvest would come.
It's so fascinating how these customs begin, but perhaps interestingly, from one point of view, is where it evolved to, because as you mentioned, it was the main inspiration for bungee jumping, which began as a modern day sport 1,300 miles to the southwest of Vanuatu in New Zealand. So, only relatively a few short decades ago, in recent time. But we've acquired, I guess, so many of our modern day thoughts and activities and adventures from almost primitive roots that stretch back millennia.
Let me take you to a different continent. There was a time, Africa, Djibouti, that you were trying to source and follow the ancient salt trade. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I can. It was probably one of the more painful moments for me, at least as it regards my family. I had decided I was really fascinated in trying to trace the routing of the salt caravans as they made their way through these very steep canyons that are rather forbidding and hot, and leading to Lac Assal, which is where they would remove the salt from. Lac Assal is the lowest spot on the African continent, and it is the second saltiest body of water on the planet. Interestingly enough, the saltiest is in Antarctica, but this is the second saltiest body of water, and caravans carrying these giant salt chunks would then leave and through this narrow slot canyon make their way back to where it could join up with other trading routes and distribute their goods. And so Djibouti is meteorologically the hottest country on earth. As far as it doesn't hold the record for the hottest day, but taken as a whole over the year, it has the highest average temperature of any country on the planet. And I had scheduled a visit to Djibouti during a time when I thought the heat was going to be a little less fierce than it is in the heart of the summer. And so near the end of September, as an add-on to a trip I was taking with my family on safari in Kenya, we headed over to Djibouti, and I had tried to arrange for 3 camels that would help us to get through these slot canyons with the help of a local outfitter. And when we arrived on site, it became apparent that the temperature had not abated to the degree that I was hoping. And while nighttime temperatures did dip down to a rather cooling 98 degrees, during the daytime it shot up to around 130 or so.
Oh, wow.
And so we headed out through this canyon, and we started at like 5:30 in the morning at first light. And it seemed okay until until like mid-morning, when the sun started to crest and penetrate parts of the canyon. And I encouraged my wife and son to kind of rest in the shade. And there were little pockets of water because the Slot Canyon did have little bits of water here and there. And I splashed in the water, and my wife stayed with me, and I tried to get my son to also hang back with us, but he decided to race ahead with the local guide, and it turned out that he started not feeling too well. When we caught up with him, he was really not doing well at all. So we kind of found another piece of shade in what was a very rapidly diminishing slice of shade as the sun got higher and higher. And I had to wind up emptying out the cooler that we had of melting ice over his body as he was lying there to make him feel a little better. And then he eventually wanted to continue on ahead, and then my wife wasn't feeling that well, and she started resting in sort of like a cave-like area, and then I wasn't feeling that well. But then my wife decided that she was very worried about my son who had gone ahead, and she decided to go try to reach him. And I was very upset about the fact that they didn't have enough camels, and I convinced we'll call him the guide or the expedition leader, although I'm not sure how qualified he was, to take off all of the gear that was on the camel, allow me to ride on the camel so that I could reach my son and wife, and which he did, and as we headed toward where they had hiked toward, I saw in the distance they were lying on the ground, but it was on an uphill gradient, and the camel does not stop when it's going uphill. They were trying to reach the top, and I'm riding on top of the camel as it is practically walking over my wife and son, who decided to collapse right in the middle of the camel trail. And my son became convinced that I was actually trying to kill them, and I was like escaping on my own private camel like I was in a Rolls Royce and leaving them to die, when in fact I was just trying to catch up with them and offer whatever assistance I could. So as you might imagine, it created quite a tense family dynamic for us. But we had traveled together all around the planet, and so these kind of misadventures were not as strikingly anomalous as you might think, but it was a very 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 it was a very uncomfortable situation. Let's put it that way.
Oh, in many respects.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a heck of a challenge going out there in that type of heat. Can't imagine.
Well, then we got my wife on the camel to try to get us to the nearest waiting four-wheel drive and some air conditioning. And then my son and I were throwing water from what little water supply we had onto her as she was just barely holding on and muttering, "I'm not going to die in Djibouti. I'm not going to die in Djibouti." So it was a scarring episode for a year or two after that. Now we could all look back on it and sort of chuckle about what happened, but adventures like that kind of sit with you for a long time, and it's just part of one's colorful resume, I guess.
Yeah, it's not all guts and glory.
No, it most certainly isn't.
With all your travels, what's the strangest thing you've ever seen?
Well, I've seen many a strange thing, and I guess because I try to do a bunch of research before I leave for someplace, I'm not often shocked by too many things, but I do recall being in Nepal and meeting the sadhu people, who are the very holy adherents to the Hindu religion. Their faces are often made up with paints of sorts. And there were a group of sadhus that practiced a kind of abandonment of lust ceremony where they actually would lift giant boulders with their penis. And it was something that I was shocked by. I won't forget anytime soon. And it as it turned out, I've recently Googled that because it almost seemed like, wait, this couldn't possibly be the case. But there are this group of very strict adherents to this kind of faith that believe that it's like an attestation of their abandonment of lust in any way.
So I take it they're fastening some kind of rope around the penis, then down to the boulders? I mean, how big a boulder are we talking about?
We're talking about a large boulder. Let's see, 2 feet wide, 2 feet, 3 feet wide, a foot and a half deep, and a heavy rope. And then around their organ, they would have some cloth on that to kind of protect them from rope burn. And then to that, they would tie very tight knot, and they would lift the boulder.
Ouch.
So I would say that was a somewhat surprising, unexpected sight to see.
Now, you've seen a lot of rituals throughout your years. And can you describe a few of those for us that really were strange and kind of questioned that you saw?
I've seen so many different types of rituals, and I don't second guess them in terms of strangeness because I'm also fascinated by religions and religious ceremonies. And so it's not just indigenous people, it's people that might even live in modern day society that are so fervent about their beliefs that they will go to rather extreme lengths to show their devotion. I think of the Kavadi, which is a religious ceremony I witnessed in Mauritius, where their body is pierced in maybe 50 or so ways as they will march with giant weights on their shoulder and huge pieces of metal going through their mouth that have weights hanging from them. and they will be heading to a temple to show their devotion to one of the multitudes of Hindu deities that they worship. I've seen the slaughtering of animals that are meant to also be given as sacrifices. In Europe, you go to Crowpatrick in Ireland, the holiest mountain on that island, and they will climb Crowpatrick barefoot, which might not sound that extreme, except for the fact that the way to the top of Crowpatrick it's a total rocky scree, and a scree is just jumbled glass sharp shards of rock, and at rather steep descents, and you'll see an immense horde of people going up barefoot in what I could only think is an indescribably painful process to reach the very top where St. Patrick fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. So it's said, I think, that it was from there that he expelled all the snakes from Ireland. So, you can find all manner of very intense rituals and ceremonies that take place all around. In the United States, I think of I think it's the largest pilgrimage in the country that eventually ends up in Rancho de Chamayo in New Mexico, where the Catholic faith will find their salvation in this church where they will smear their body with holy dirt that comes out of one of the side chapels that can be found there. And that is a lengthy pilgrimage that they'll take for, more than 100 miles. That's not counting the ones you see in Europe to Santiago de Compostela. Religions have engendered an immense number of really fervent followers that are very eager to show their devotion to their God.
And, they go back into antiquity. The ones that I've seen, one comes to mind when I was in Guatemala. The local Mayans, I was there on a program. We built some water containments for school, this big concrete structure. And the Mayans believed that everything had a spirit. And the elders did this ritual to do away with any evil spirits. And it goes back to the Mayans thousands of years ago.
Exactly.
And, yeah, I was invited to watch it. It was amazing. They would, at the four corners of the structure, they dug out a little pit, and they would put tobacco and some other things in there. And then they had butchered a chicken, and part of the chicken was placed in there as an offering. They would cover it up, and then they splashed blood on the corner, and then lit a candle over where they had just buried their offerings. And I did some research when I came back, and the original Mayans didn't use chickens. They used captives. So they would bury human beings at the four corners. And then when they had done that, in front of the structure, they built this huge copal fire, so that copal incense, and then went into this chanting. And obviously they were speaking Mayan. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but they were making gestures to the northeast, south, and west, and very fervent with candles, and it was remarkable to see. I felt very privileged because I don't know if many non-Mayan have seen this before, but like you, it's kind of a privilege. And yeah, you don't want to label it as strange or, it's what they do, and it was fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, that's why I was also reluctant to kind of label it in that manner. In the Guatemalan highlands, I saw animistic ceremonies with the swaying of incense cans on the steps of Santo Thomas Church in Chichicastenango. And you can also see a lot of these ancient practices that do go back to the Mayans who, developed a kind of almost deadly basketball game in the courts of their Mayan structures that were built thousands of years ago that are a hallmark of some of the more fatalistic practices that had occurred back then amongst those people.
Yeah, sport was taken very seriously then.
It sure was, yes. Yes, for sure.
Well, let me change subjects on you because you've been to a place that's on my bucket list and seen something that I definitely want to see, and that is in the Sudan and the pyramids there. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, that was sort of another close call because as it turned out, within about 2 months of me leaving Sudan, that's when the Civil War broke out. And to this day, I think that's the most deadly atrocity still occurring on planet Earth right now, even though it receives not very much notice in the headlines, scant attention being paid to the tragedies occurring in Sudan. But a few months before war broke out, I was fortunate enough, once again with my intrepid family, to have visited the Meroe pyramids, Meroe. They are a large collection of pyramids, more than what you can find in Egypt, actually, that are out in the middle of the desert. And I found it so much more strikingly moving and exciting to experience than the pyramids in Egypt. Because to get to the pyramids in Egypt, you're going through traffic lights in Giza and you're going past barricades and policemen and signs with rules and regulations and, chain link fences. And here you are out in the middle of the desert. It feels like you are sort of emerging from an Indiana Jones film set. And the dunes almost are encroaching on the pyramids themselves. And you open up these giant wooden doors and enter chambers with hieroglyphics that are etched into the corridors of these tombs that are inside of the pyramids. And all that they ask is that when you leave, you close the door to protect the hieroglyphics from the sandstorms just outside. That's about as much regulation as there exists there. And so you can be there at sunrise and just watch this incredible spectacle as these amazing structures light up a fiery orange-red color at the top. And as the sun starts to rise over distant mountains, it's just an astonishing thing to witness and to be able to wander through these different groups of pyramids, say maybe 8 over here and maybe 7 over there, and you might need a camel to get from one region to another, and there are still local people that will ferry you across, but there's no tourism infrastructure to speak of at all, and they do have an encampment where it's possible to spend the night nearby within sight of those pyramids, but no big hotels or anything like that. Meroe is a small village a few hours north of Khartoum, which is where it's at the confluence of the Blue Nile and the Nile. And in an attempt to visit that exact confluence, me and my family got in a boat and headed toward the confluence. And as we approached and got closer to that point, a large whistle came from the bank, and we saw it was a policeman along with a whole military group, and he was warning us that we had to make a U-turn because shots had been fired, and there was some kind of conflagration taking place in the vicinity, and I guess they wanted to protect any outsiders from that. But I think that was all the beginnings of this, what eventually became a giant civil war.
Wow. Well, take us to those pyramids. As you're opening up those wooden doors and walking in, what did you see and what did you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it was something I had actually dreamt of for years because I did know of the existence of these pyramids for a long, long time. So I'm just often filled with a sense of gratitude and blessing to be able to witness something that I had only dreamed of in the past. I mean, it's one thing to be able to enjoy something that you've been looking forward to. It's something else when you've only fantasized about something for over a decade and you're right on the cusp of actually experiencing it. And it's just this extra rush of exhilaration that you get that just makes you feel so it floods you with a sense of gratitude, and it it just reminds you of how many miracles exist on this planet. It's an indescribable, a very indescribable feeling.
Yeah, if you can't see it on I am green with envy and jealousy because it's like you, it's someplace that I want to go visit, and you described it as like being in Egypt in the 1920s. It's that kind of feel.
It is. I could only imagine what visiting the Sphinx would have been like at the end of the 19th century or in the 1920s. Where where you're just really just witnessing this miracle that you weren't familiar with, and you have there's no guidebooks about it, and there's scant information about these pyramids in Sudan. I mean, I suppose you could dig up some information somewhere, but it's not well known at all, and so it's quite a humbling experience.
Very, very cool. The closest thing that I came to that was many years ago before the Yucatan Peninsula got very touristy. I hired a guide to drive us through the various Mayan sites there. And one of them literally was just like you're speaking of. We were driving down this road. There was all of a sudden a fence started, maybe 100 meters either side, an opening. A family was there. They took your couple of pesos and they said, okay, there you go. Go take a look. Nobody else was there. And we were just scampering through these ruins, and there'd be iguanas running around through there. And yeah, I'm sure they can't do it now, but yeah, what a privilege to be able to walk in those places and then without all the noise and the touristy things. Because I don't know if this is how you saw it, but as you're walking in the quiet in those old stone ruins and buildings, and you're trying to think, what was it like and who were these people? But it's the quiet that allows you to think and kind of almost get a feel for it. Do you have any kind of sense of that?
I mean, yes. It's actually remarkable how much of those opportunities have almost been stolen away. You have to really work hard to be able to defeat this pervading sense of Instagram frenzy that has taken over almost the whole planet. And I mean, I suppose social media has some redeeming aspects to it, but in many ways, things like Instagram have killed the ability to find these undiscovered gems in a pristine manner. And so many times, unless you're up at 4 or 5 in the morning, you are just encountering hordes of people whose sole purpose is to be there so that they can lift their hands with a phone device and show that their face is in front of whatever object it is that can make other people feel jealous, or it's like a status symbol thing to record a selfie of yourself. And these people are not really interested, it would seem to me, so much in travel as they are in kind of just creating notches on a belt, that it's a sad thing, and there is a joy in discovering things that you're just totally unfamiliar with. I remember in Guyana, I visited Kaieteur Falls, which is the world's tallest single drop waterfall. It's 780 feet high. And without going from one ledge to another, it just plummets down 780 feet, an amazing bridal veil of falling water. And I camped overnight there. And the moon came up, and I saw a moonbow there. And what blew my mind is I actually had been familiar with the concept of moonbows, which a lot of people are not really that cognizant of the fact that there are moonbows that are created, but the popular wisdom had always been for decades and decades and decades that there were only like two places in the world where you could see a moonbow. One was at Victoria Falls, and the other was that's in Africa on the border of Zambia and Zimbabwe, and the other was Cumberland Falls in Kentucky. And I twice went to Kentucky to try to see that moonbow, and struck out each time. They say the third time's the charm or whatever, and perhaps that'll be coming up again soon, I hope. But what blew my mind is that here was a moonbow that nobody ever knew or nobody ever spoke about or you never read existed. And it was just so exciting to me to be able to see something that, as far as I knew, no one had ever seen or written about before. I'm sure like locals or indigenous people had noticed it, but someone that was cognizant with a moonbow to stumble on an unknown moonbow, I think it just felt really, really fun.
Yeah, what a privilege to discover that. But, that kind of brings up the work that you do, the photography and the stories. You've written a number of very well-received books, beautiful photography. Tell us about that part of your life in what you're seeking to capture and put together in these books.
I've been working hard on books for the last decade or so, and I'm really excited that only a couple of weeks ago I learned I won the gold medal, got a Lowell Thomas Award for Travel Book of the Year for my 9th book, which is called American Character, Surprising Portraits of an Unseen Nation, which is coming out at a very appropriate moment in our nation, which seems poised, almost riven to be ready for a civil war of sorts, with half the country so suspicious and angry at the other half. And what this is a very unique behind-the-scenes look at lots and lots and lots of obscure subcultures around our country, from both the left and the right, red-wing states and right-wing states. You'll have eel catchers and rattlesnake wranglers, and you'll have nuclear physicists and ballerinas, and tornado chasers, and all kinds of very, very unique characters. And I spent a lot of time researching the historical context and the background of a lot of these people, and how they came to live these kind of lives. And I've learned so much respect for what America is, and how the development of our country and our unique history created so many different types of people living unique lifestyles according to the very specific geographic niches in which they settled. And I found that I believe, and I think from online reviews that I've read, believe that the book is really a relatively healing balm right now, much needed for understanding one another at a time that's very politically fraught. A recent review in the New York Sun compared my work to Walt Whitman, which blew my mind, and I was really excited about that. But the book I'm currently working on is called Secret Wonders, Surprising Adventures for the Intrepid Traveller. Many of my books now, the last 5, have been published by Skyhorse Publishing, and they're really beautiful hardcover coffee table books. And this book is going to be coming out September of next year. And this is going to include the whole planet and some of my unique discoveries that I've found. The more eccentric and oddball, the better, and the happier I am.
You once said that you wanted to craft a life versus making a living. What did you mean by that?
I guess I realized about the time that I took that first leap of faith jumping out of an airplane on my graduation day that while many of my friends were climbing up the corporate ladder in pursuit of wealth and money, I was moving across instead of up. I was like traveling across the United States, hopefully across the world in later years. And that for me, it was much more about crafting a life, cobbling together as many experiences as possible, as opposed to how can I make money, which was going to kind of channel me into one narrow band of activity. And I've been very fortunate that my artistic visions have been able somehow to occasionally translate into the transmission gears of money making, whether it be through books or gallery showings of my photography, selling my fine art photography, lecturing. I've lectured on cruise ships that travel around the world. I've lectured on private jet trips around the world. So for me, it wasn't so much about getting paid for that, but the experiences that those kind of activities might unlock. And so I've tried as hard as possible to defeat Mother Nature, as it were, in this one lifespan that we're given. I gave a TEDx talk on this, which is called Ensuring Your Soul Doesn't Grow Gray Before Your Hair Does. And this was my way of getting revenge with Mother Nature, because I always thought it was terribly unfair that you're only going to get to live once. When I was very young, I thought, well, by the time I'm 65, they'll invent something and I'll be able to live a couple of hundred years. I need that at least, to live a full life. And now that I'm getting much closer to the end than I am to the beginning, I'm like really pissed that that it doesn't seem like there's an unlimited ticket. So I've tried to live as many lifetimes as possible, stuffing as many experiences as I can into this one mortality span. And this is my way of dealing and coping with limited time on Earth.
Well said. I always said that I value experiences more than money, which is always going to keep me poor. But at the old folks' home, I'm going to have better stories.
Yes, well, that's certainly one way of looking at it. And, you're not going to be able to take your money with you. So it's really the experiences you have and also the memories that you'll leave in other people's minds about the ways you've touched them. And I think when you live a larger footprint, you have more opportunities to have an influence and effect on other people. I had prior to the pandemic done annual slideshows in my home that National Public Radio called one of the hottest tickets in New York City, and the New York Times did 3 profiles on it. And in this one living room, a small section of which you can see right now, we would stuff as many as 80 people, and I would give a slideshow of my previous year. And we did that about 6 times per year. So we'd have like 500 people a year hearing me talk about my adventures and the places I had experienced, both very far-flung and exotic Indiana Jones adventures, and also things, and this was most exciting to me, in people's own backyards that they were not familiar with. And as a result, a lot of people left those shows and were very inspired. I would learn about that years later. I'd learn about it, I guess, more immediately. We had a little guest book people would write in. But later on, I would find out how much it touched them and the kind of memories that it created and the way it also affected how they approached their own life. And so I do think that one of my legacies, I'm hoping, will be how I might have influenced other people to live a more expansive life during their time on Earth.
Well, any final thoughts specifically, too, about of all these adventures, the people you've seen, the places you've gone, what kind of life lessons have you drawn and learned from that?
Well, I think I've really summed that up in so much of what I've just mentioned. It's that you need to embrace the moment, be able to walk through as many windows of opportunity as you find presenting itself to you, not walk away from possible experiences, and just try to push the boundaries of your comfort zone so that you find that routine occurrences are not the outer perimeters of what you do, but rather striking out and trying to make each and every day a brand new moment to seize the life that we're given in as vibrant a way as possible.
Yeah, if you look, there's just so much to see and so much to learn from other people, and how people could say they're bored and stay and watch video games, whatever. It always astonishes me. There's a whole world out there with such fascinating and interesting people and experiences. You just got to step outside and embrace it.
Yeah, I'm hoping against hope that that our digital screen life does not just devour us, and that we're able to make a better differentiation between IRL in real life and what's happening on a screen, because in the end it's only what's going on outdoors, as they say, touching grass and touching trees and smelling the air, that really in the end helps to, I think, bring out the most vibrant, sensational parts of what we can be as human beings.
And keeps your soul from getting gray.
Before your hair does, at least, yes. For sure.
Well, Peter, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm very pleased and that you took the time to join us. You've done some remarkable work, and we'll have links to all of your books, and really look forward to this next one that's coming out. And be safe out there. And again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was really a true joy. Appreciate it.
All right, Peter, you take care.
You too now.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road when we get together again, share a glass of whiskey, and hear more stories of adventure as told by those who live them. Until then, check us out at michaeljreinhardt.com, where you'll find more of my work as an adventure photojournalist. Photos, videos, and articles of interesting people, mysterious places, and exotic cultures from the wild places of the world.